Hi, and welcome to Crash Course Cryptozoology. Today I'd like to discuss with you a very little known and even more little recognized piece of cryptozoological evidence. This evidence pertains to a cryptid that is often regarded as one of those subjects in cryptozoology that lacks real evidence and is truly abundant with misguided pieces of alleged evidence. The reported Yeti bones of 2017, certain trackways, and even particular hair samples all contribute to the notion of this subject of the Yeti being one fraught with misidentification. It's also possible that this plays a role in the assumption that Yeti sightings can be attributed widely to bears, although the notion that mythology tends to misconstrue the physically real probably is more at play there than anything else. Of course, having said all of that, this particular report pertains to the Yeti. For those who are unfamiliar with a bit deeper than baseline knowledge of the Yeti is a term described from the native word yadi, which roughly means animal man. The Yeti is often described by both locals and Western witnesses as a dark, black, or brown humanoid animal, most likely a primate of some kind, with slightly different to human proportions. Most reports actually describe this kind of reddish-brown creature as having these somewhat stout legs and these very long arms, giving it almost the same proportions, or at least similar proportions, to a gorilla, rather than those of a person, which has a bit longer legs and more equal limb size. Contrary to popular belief, these animals are often reported seen in the Himalayan valleys rather than on the Himalayan mountains, although track evidence seems to pop up a bit more in these mountains, likely due to the presence of snow. The Yeti first came to Western interest in 1951 when mountaineer Eric Shipton discovered sets of these very strange tracks along the Menlong Glacier. The validity of these tracks is still yet to be really confirmed, but it was never admitted to be a hoax. This same kind of pattern plays out throughout 1951 all the way to as far recently as 2019 when the Indian Army found these somewhat bipedal-looking tracks that are likely those of a hare of some sort that were at first attributed to the Yeti. However, today's video will be discussing a particular piece of evidence, a very tantalizing and arguably very strong piece of evidence from 1991. It's somewhat recent in terms of Yeti evidence. It is, most likely, the most significant Yeti report that has ever been reported. It involves a very well-established and well-respected naturalist, a person you could really call a man of science who has a lot of credibility to his name. It involves an exceedingly detailed account of what it was this scientist said had happened. Probably the most detailed report for any cryptid out there. So detailed that it's an entire scientific paper on itself. And it also contains the most rare and, while not visually so, they are the most anecdotally mystifying photographs of an alleged Yeti ever taken. In 1991, a Russian naturalist named Arkady Tishkov joined the Soviet-Chinese Glaciological expedition. This expedition set out to map the geography of the area relative to the Himalayan-Chinese border, with a particular focus on the Tibetan Plateau. The way in which the glaciers of the area made up the area was of significance to these countries, and Professor Tishkov was one of those trusted to carry out this expedition properly. While on this expedition, in September, which was the second to last month of the expedition, Tishkov reported, while being away from the other members of the group, seeing what he described as some kind of primate, a kind that he was not familiar with, a kind that he also believed science was not familiar with, but one that he noted he then believed the locals we're very familiar with. He does not describe a supernatural entity or a particularly mystical type of animal. He describes, very plain and simply, an ape that isn't supposed to be there. He followed it for some time as it made its way across a slope, took a few photographs that he could, and left after feeling threatened by the presence of the animal. When he went back later, he did his best to document the evidence that had been left behind, and after writing a paper on the subject, never dipped his toes into anything either paranormal or cryptozoological or anything of the sort ever again. Nor had he before this happened. Without further ado, instead of giving a more detailed, in-depth analysis of this myself, I will let Professor Tishkov's paper speak for itself. In September of 1991, in the Himalayas, the author observed and photographed at a considerable distance a human-like animal, which may have been a Yeti. As a specialist in biogeography and a biologist by training, the author is not disposed to reaching a definitive conclusion regarding the nature of the observed animal, but he thinks the incident warrants publication of this report. As a member of the then Soviet-Chinese Glaciological expedition, the author worked in Tibet for 3 months, from August to October 1991, visiting many regions of the Tibetan Plateau and the Himalayas, including the environment of Mounts Everest, Gya-dred, Shoja, and several others. It was on one of those routes that the author had the Yeti encounter described below. In September 1991, the expedition worked on the northern, southern, and southeastern slopes of Mount Gya-dred. On the day of the encounter, our small group had worked in a spot some 25 miles, 40 kilometers, from the settlement of Nilam, on the Nepal-Chinese border. The group consisted of 4 scientists from the Commonwealth of Independent States, 5 specialists from China, and 2 Tibetan yak drivers. We worked at altitudes of 15,700 to 16,700 feet, roughly 4,800 to 5,100 meters above sea level, in a transition zone between high-elevation steppes and the glaciers. This zone is interspersed with shrub growths and rock debris. The continental montane climate of the region is characterized by cool summers with precipitation and cold, snowless winters. From November to April, there is practically no precipitation. The rainy season lasts from July to September, when temperatures rise to 50 to 59 Fahrenheit, 10 to 15 Celsius, in the daytime, and fall to 21 degrees Fahrenheit, which is -6 Celsius, at night. Forests occur some 30 miles, 50 kilometers, from the area, at altitudes below 12,500 feet, 3,800 meters. On September 22nd, 1991, I was en route to a glacier on the southeastern slope of Mount Gya-dred, about midday, on the top of a moraine ridge, at a distance of about 400 feet, 120 meters. I noticed a human-like animal sitting by a boulder on the sunlit side. My position was lower on the slope, and at first I did not see the full silhouette. A little later, however, I observed the animal in full. It had the following characteristics: erect, bipedal posture, dark brown color, cone-shaped head, no visible neck, long forelimbs, and short and slightly flexed hind limbs. When first observed, the creature was squatting in what seemed an unnatural position for an animal, with its back touching the sun-warmed surface of the boulder. It was a rare moment for this altitude and season, when sunshine floods the mountains, and nature comes alive after a cold morning. I could not identify what I saw. My first impression was of a creature resembling a monkey, a dog, or a bear. But its anatomy, its subsequent behavior, the great absolute elevation of the place, and the distance from forests and settlements made me conclude that I faced a different kind of animal. Tempted by the natural interest of a biologist, I bent down and started stalking the creature, skirting the boulder on the left-hand side. However, the attempt proved unsuccessful. The noises I made apparently startled it, as it appeared from behind the boulder on 2 feet and, slightly bending and helping itself along with a forelimb, moved behind another and bigger boulder. I do not think it saw me, and presumably only reacted to the noises that I made. I then remembered that I had a camera in my bag, a Soviet-made Zenit TT-1. and that an attempt could be made at photographing the animal. After adjusting the camera to the right setting, I began to approach the boulder. The intended maneuver remained the same, rounding the boulder from a position somewhat lower on the slope, and observing the creature from a closer range. I tried unsuccessfully to take the first photo from a distance of about 330 feet, 100 meters, maybe more, at a moment when the sun appeared from behind a cloud. To see the whole of the animal, I straightened up, but the effect photographing from below was bound to distort the image. When its full silhouette appeared in the viewfinder, the animal turned its head toward me and began watching me. I then became frightened and dared not even move at first. Finally, I turned and ran down the slope. Because of the high altitude, I quickly tired, having covered no more than 1,000 feet, 300 meters. My colleagues were at a still lower elevation, walking along a stream. They did not react to my yells and arm waving because of the noise of the stream. To descend and cross the stream to join them would have been quite an effort, and contrary to my objective, which was to reach some moraines near a small glacier about 6 miles, 10 kilometers, from the spot where I encountered the presumed Yeti. Having assessed the situation, I decided to return and attempt once again to photograph the animal from a closer range. For this purpose, I took off my bright-colored jacket, and leaving behind all unnecessary items, ascended the slope again, crawling towards my destination. On the first attempt, I miscalculated the distance, and set up far from the object of photography. The sun came out again, and I took the first photo. The creature kept squatting and rising, and peering from behind the boulder. I could only see it when I stood full height amidst the boulders. Hiding behind them, I resumed crawling, approaching the animal from the right-hand side. A second photographic attempt was more successful, and I took 3 photos, almost one after the other. Then, keeping the animal in view, I began approaching it. The creature, alerted, bent down and moved towards me. I stopped, but it was too late. The animal moved behind the boulder, and presumably descended down the other side of the slope. When I reached the boulder, the animal had disappeared, and was not seen again. Later that day, after my regular scientific work, I returned to the site of the encounter, and thoroughly examined the terrain within a radius of 2,600 to 3,300 feet, about 800 to 1,000 meters. My findings were as follows. 3 large niche shelters were found, which could have been used by the animal during the warmer time of the year. The substrate was a kind that did not show tracks, but it was disturbed, thus indicating that the niches had been used. Feces resembling human coprolites but darker were found in 2 places, separated by a distance of about 3,300 feet, 1,000 meters. One sample was near the place of the encounter. The feces contained the remains of plant tissues, probably roots of plants of the genus Sacharia and others. On the slope of southern exposure, at an altitude of 16,100 feet, 4,900 meters, there were spots of dugout soil, 8 by 8 inches, 20 by 20 centimeters, and up to 4 inches, 10 centimeters deep, with marks of bitten-off upper parts of roots and other underground plant organs. It can be said with a high degree of probability that these were not the result of feeding activities by rodents or other known animals. Measurements of the boulder next to which the animal had been observed showed that its height with a slightly bent posture could not have exceeded 4 feet 7 inches, 1.4 meters. The questions I addressed that evening to the yak drivers were to no avail, as the Tibetans were reluctant to discuss any matters at all through the Chinese. 2 days later, the expedition left that area, and after 3 days of travel and work in a neighboring valley, returned to the base camp near Nyalam, on the Lhasa-Kathmandu route. A month later, after difficult motor rides and hikes on foot in Tibet, we arrived in the city of Langchao. Here, in a talk with the director of the local Institute of Glaciology and Geocryology, we learned that my Yeti encounter was not the only one in that area. Earlier, in the 1960s and 1970s, during the first Chinese glaciological expeditions in the area of Mount Zhizhiyabangma, Chinese scientists are also said to have found evidence of the Yeti's presence at great altitudes, and reportedly had even attempted to catch one. My observations of a human-like creature lasted, with interruptions, about 1 hour. Finally, presumably disturbed by my presence, the creature disappeared. I managed to take 4 photos with a Zenith TTL camera, equipped with a regular lens, and ORWO color slide film, made in the former East Germany, from a distance of about 260 feet, 80 meters. The landscape and the feces were photographed on black and white film. The photos were developed when I returned to Moscow. The results, alas, are insufficient as convincing evidence of the sighting. The silhouette of the creature in the photos is only observable through great magnification, about times 100 to 200, with the inevitable result of emulsion grains blurring the image. The creature's profile, based on my observations, is as follows. The head is not big. It is cone-shaped, and is covered with dark brown, apparently short hair. The neck, due to hair cover, was not visible, the head appearing to sit right on the shoulders. The shoulders are sloping and narrow. The arms are long, and when they are folded, the elbows jut out. When extended, the arms reach below the knees. The legs are short and a little flexed. On the knees, the hair is flattened or worn off. The creature moves swiftly enough on two legs. It may occasionally take shelter in niches under big boulders, concealing the entrance with smaller boulders and stones. Shelters of longer duration may exist in more hospitable forested areas. During the summer and autumn period, it feeds, apparently, mainly on plants, including roots and other underground organs of alpine grasses. Its feces are of a dark, almost black color, containing plant fibers, and resembling human coprolites. The author plans to continue his professional work devoted to the study of Himalayan vegetation dynamics. He has no direct plans connected with the Yeti problem. However, learning from experience, the author will be alert and better prepared for a possible new sighting of human-like animals occurring in the mountains.
Tishkov was very dedicated on this one occasion in his life to documenting what it was he believed he had seen. An objective analysis seems to really fall short of explaining why Tishkov would want to perpetrate a hoax. There's no indication he was the hoaxing kind before or after this happened. This was a one-time occurrence in his life. He even states in his paper that he hopes to kind of leave this behind. And no wonder. He is a naturalist and a geographer who has won several awards from his Russian colleagues, and he's very well respected in his field. It's not exactly good for one's name, let's say, to start dedicating yourself to the Yeti of all things.
And, of course, this brings us to the actual Tishkoff photographs. The Tishkoff photographs currently can only be found on one website on the entirety of the internet. That website being alamas.ru. The webpage the photos lay on serves as an amateur analysis to some extent of the photographs themselves. Admittedly, the analysis itself is full of assumptions, premature ones, such as the inclusion of horn-like protrusions on the subject's head in interpretations, protrusions that Tishkov himself never described. The direction which the subject is facing is also assumed. However, it is indicated that at some point this sort of positioning was actually more clear in color prints of the photos. For instance, in figure 3C, the writer indicates the wide mouth is slightly opened and the tip of the tongue is seen. A red stain on that place was seen on color prints. Unfortunately, these color prints cannot be located anywhere, and as far as we know, these grainy black and whites are the only versions of these photos still in existence. Among the interpretation's flaws in being a bit premature and perhaps even too heavily reliant on the directions listed in the Tishkov testimony, the photographs themselves are of extreme significance for one very crucial reason that is connected to a bunch of sub-reasons. There is a subject in this photo that moves. The background does not move. The subject, however, does. Meaning it is certainly an independent object of some kind, which of course would then indicate this is probably a living animal of some sort, whether it be a bear, a smaller known primate, perhaps even a person. Normally, that would be where this is left. But the sub-reasons are really what drive home the point about how crucial the Tishkov photos are to the case of the Yeti. They would be just photographs of some kind of living organism, if not for the heavily credible nature of not only Tishkov's testimony, but of his character. These are photographs produced by a trained naturalist and geographist, very keen in observation, who had never dipped his toes into any kind of out-of-the-normal subject, nor did he ever again. In fact, in his scientific paper, he states he'd like to move away from the Yeti, most likely to save his own credibility in his field. And he's still very well respected in that field. That person is the person who said, "These photos are of an animal I saw that was an ape that we are not familiar with." And even though the photos themselves only show a moving animal, it is the credibility of the person saying what the animal at least looked like that makes them extremely crucial. The Tishkov testimony and the subsequent photos don't take much of a limelight in cryptozoology, and that's really a shame, because out of all the evidence for the Yeti that is available to us, Tishkov's combination of photos and credibility might be some of, if not the best of it out there. That being said, until next time.